You're going to die. Not eventually, not someday far in the future. Soon. Within days, perhaps hours. A mind flayer tadpole writhes behind your eye, burrowing deeper into your brain with each passing moment, transforming you cell by cell into something monstrous. You'll sprout tentacles where your mouth used to be. Your thoughts will turn alien and cold. Everything you are will be eaten away from the inside, replaced by a creature that feeds on brains. This is what binds them together, the people sitting around the campfire tonight. Not friendship, not some noble quest. Terror. The desperate, clawing need to survive just one more day before the transformation takes them all. And yet, impossibly, they're laughing. Welcome to camp, traveler. The fire crackles warm against the deepening night, and the Sword Coast stretches dark and dangerous all around. But here, in this small circle of light, something unexpected is happening. People who should be enemies are becoming family. Monsters are learning to be human again, and secrets buried for centuries are finally being spoken aloud. Tonight's camp sits in a small clearing, surrounded by ancient trees whose branches sway in the evening breeze. The fire crackles and pops, sending embers spiraling upward into the darkening sky. Bedrolls circle the flames, each claimed by someone who has nowhere else to go, no one else to trust. The smell of wood smoke mingles with the earthy scent of the forest and whatever simple meal has been scavenged from the day's journey. This is more than a place to sleep. This is the only safety these people have. Every long rest requires 40 portions of camp supplies, food gathered throughout desperate travels. Every night could be the last before the transformation. Every conversation might be a final confession before tentacles replace tongues and alien hunger consumes every human thought. But something strange has happened. The tadpole that should have turned them all into monsters within days has remained dormant. Weeks have passed, and they're all still themselves. Still human, still elven, still tiefling. The parasite has created an unexpected connection between them, a psychic bond that lets them sense each other's emotions, share each other's thoughts. Intimacy without choice, family without asking. And so they talk, not because they want to bare their souls, but because hiding becomes impossible when someone else can feel your fear, taste your shame, sense the lies before you speak them. The fire casts dancing shadows across familiar faces as guards come down and truths emerge. These are the stories they tell when death sits patient just behind their eyes, waiting. Shadowheart sits apart from the others, dark hair falling like a curtain across half her face. The half-elf cleric has kept her secrets close since the moment she fell from the crashing Nautiloid, that massive mind flayer ship that brought this nightmare into all their lives. Shikar guards a mysterious artifact in a githyanki prism, refuses to speak about her goddess, flinches when anyone asks about the scar on her hand that causes her such visible pain. But tonight, something shifts. Perhaps it's the psychic connection the tadpole creates, making isolation impossible. Perhaps it's exhaustion from carrying burdens alone. Her voice, soft but clear, cuts through the fire's crackle. My name isn't really Shadowheart. The confession hangs in the air. Someone adds wood to the fire, and the flames leap higher, illuminating her face as she continues. She doesn't know her true name, she admits. It was taken from her along with most of her memories. Everything before the cloister exists only in fragments, dreams that might be real or might be false memories planted by her superiors. What she does remember clearly begins at the Cloister of Somber Embrace, a secret Sharan temple hidden in Baldur's Gate. Shar, she explains for those who don't know, is the mistress of the night, the Lady of Loss, goddess of darkness and secrets. The Sharan faith teaches that memory is pain, that the past is a burden too heavy for mortals to carry. Better to let it all go, to embrace the merciful darkness of forgetting. The training was brutal, she says quietly. They taught her deception and infiltration, how to move through shadows and strike without being seen. They taught her that Shar's darkness isn't evil but compassionate, a release from suffering. When memory hurts, when the past torments, forgetting becomes mercy. She touches the wound on her hand, a nervous habit she's developed. The pain is constant, sharp and focused, like divine punishment. Sometimes she wonders if Shar is displeased with her, if she's failed in ways she can't even remember. The wound connects somehow to the artifact she guards, the mysterious prism she was ordered to deliver to Baldur's gate at any cost. She doesn't know what it is or why it matters, only that her entire mission, her sacred duty, depends on protecting it. But here's what Shadowheart hasn't told anyone yet, what she barely admits to herself. Fragments are surfacing, a forest at night, a trial where a child had to find her way home alone. Faces she doesn't recognize calling her by a name she doesn't know. And wolves, always wolves in these fragmentary dreams, snarling and threatening. What she doesn't realize yet, what the companions around this fire can't know, is that these aren't false memories. They're the truth clawing its way back through Shar's imposed forgetfulness. Her real name is Genevieve Hallowleaf, and she wasn't raised in darkness at all. She was kidnapped as a child from a loving family who worshipped Selûne, Shar's greatest enemy, the goddess of moonlight and memory. The wolves in her dreams weren't threats. They were her elven father in wild shape, desperately trying to save her as Sharan kidnappers dragged her away. The woman who stole her was Viconia de Vere, a name some might recognize from tales of heroes past, though the drow cleric has long since turned from whatever redemption she might have found. Viconia became Mother Superior of the Baldur's Gate cloister, and she made young Genevieve her special project. The conversion took nearly 50 years, a lifetime of torture and indoctrination and forced memory erasure using the cloister's mirror of loss. They even made Shadowheart practice her torture techniques on her own parents, though she never knew who they were, though she's forgotten every scream. Shadowheart doesn't know any of this tonight. She just knows something is wrong, that the faith she clings to feels increasingly hollow, that Shar's teachings about cutting all connections clash with the loyalty she's developing for these unlikely companions. She's particularly drawn to Lae'zel, the Githyanki warrior, though she'd never admit it. They argue constantly, two women absolutely certain they're right about everything, both secretly, terrified they might be wrong about it all. The fire crackles, and Shadowheart falls quiet, surprised at how much she's revealed. Around the circle, the others don't push for more. They understand secrets, understand how it feels to have your past used as a weapon against you. The night is still young, and there are other stories waiting to be told. Astarion lounges beyond the fire's brightest reach, ruby eyes reflecting the flames like a predator's. The pale elf has been making jokes all evening, charming and cutting in equal measure, deflecting every genuine question with wit sharp enough to draw blood. But as moonlight spills across the camp, something in him softens. He tilts his face upward, and his usual smirk fades into something raw and wondering. "I haven't seen a full moon in nearly 2 centuries, he says quietly. The others wait. They've learned that Astarion only shares truth when he's ready, that pushing him makes him retreat behind more elaborate lies. He takes a breath he doesn't technically need, old habit, and continues. His master, Cazador kept him locked away during the full moon's light. 200 years of imprisonment, 200 years of torture, 200 years of being something less than a person. Astarion was 39 when he died, a young magistrate in Baldur's Gate who made the mistake of handing down too harsh a sentence. The victim's friends came for revenge, beat him bloody in the streets, left him dying in an alley. That's when Cazador found him. The vampire lord offered eternal life, salvation from death, power beyond mortal understanding. Astarion accepted, desperate and bleeding out, not understanding the trap closing around him until it was far too late. What followed was a hell more creative than anything the 9 hells could devise. Cazador was one of 7 vampire lords, and he kept 7 spawn under his control. Astarion was just one of many tools, possessions to be used however the master wished. His nights became an endless cycle of seduction and betrayal. Lure victims back to the palace, watch Cazador drain them dry, face punishment for any hesitation or failure. The punishments were worse than death. Much worse. Once, for some minor infraction Astarion can't even remember now, Cazador sealed him in a tomb for a full year. No blood, no light, nothing but rats and darkness and the slow realization that he couldn't die, couldn't escape, could only endure. The rats became both companions and food, and by the time Cazador opened the tomb again, Astarion had forgotten how to speak in anything but screams. That was just one punishment among hundreds. There were the lessons carved into his back, runes and symbols that Astarion couldn't see, couldn't read, marking him as property. There were the nights when Cazador's affections turned into brutality that left even an undead body broken and sobbing. There was the constant, crushing knowledge that this was forever, that escape was impossible, that even death wouldn't free him because he was already dead. For 200 years, Astarion says. Voice carefully light. I was a thing that seduced and lured. Every touch meant betrayal. Every kiss ended in death. Every moment of intimacy was just another weapon I wielded on Cazador's command. He laughs, but there's no humor in it. So forgive me if I'm a bit rusty at the whole genuine emotion thing. And then came the Nautiloid, the Mind Flayer ship that should have been just another horror in a life built from horrors. Instead, it was salvation. The tadpole broke Cazador's control, severed the compulsions that had bound Astarion to his master's will for 2 centuries. More miraculous still, it let him walk in sunlight. His voice cracks slightly as he describes that first morning. He woke expecting the sun to burn him to ash, the way it should burn any vampire spawn. Instead, he felt warmth, real warmth, for the first time in 200 years. He stood in that sunlight and wept, and the tears surprised him almost as much as the freedom did. Now he has choices. He can go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. The freedom is intoxicating and absolutely terrifying. What do you do when you've been someone's puppet for 2 centuries and the strings are suddenly cut? How do you learn to trust when every kindness you've ever shown was performance? When every kindness you've received was prelude to pain? He looks around at the others, these strange people who've somehow become important to him, despite every instinct screaming not to care. He makes jokes about Gale's verbosity, teases Wyll about his heroic posturing. But beneath the mockery is something dangerously close to affection, an attachment that both pleases and frightens him. The tadpole should have transformed us by now, Astarion says softly. We should all be mindless thralls, our personalities eaten away until nothing remains but hunger. Instead, it gave me back my life. He pauses, lets bitter irony color his voice. Isn't that funny? The thing that should have destroyed me actually set me free. But freedom comes with questions. Cazador is still out there, still powerful, still waiting. The other 6 spawn remain enslaved, and Astarion doesn't know who he is beyond the monster Cazador created, doesn't know if he's capable of being anything better, or if 2 centuries of cruelty have hollowed him out beyond redemption. The moon continues its arc across the sky, and Astarion falls quiet, studying his own pale hands in the firelight. Somewhere in those hands is the possibility of something other than violence and seduction. Somewhere in his dead heart might be room for genuine feeling. The thought is fragile, easily shattered, but here in camp, surrounded by people who know what he is and haven't driven a stake through his heart, it feels almost possible. Gale has been quiet most of the evening, uncharacteristically so for a man who usually fills every silence with words. The wizard sits with a leather-bound book open in his lap, but his eyes track the fire's movement rather than the page. When he finally speaks, his voice lacks its usual professorial confidence. "I'm carrying enough destructive power to level a city," he says. "Possibly several cities, depending on the blast radius. It's growing stronger every day." That gets everyone's attention. Gale offers a weak smile and taps his chest, right over his heart. There's a fragment of corrupted weave lodged here, Netherese magic from an empire that fell over 1,000 years ago. It feeds on magic itself, growing more powerful with each spell it consumes. Eventually, when it's fed enough, it will detonate. Everyone within miles will simply cease to exist. He says it calmly, clinically, as if discussing interesting weather rather than a magical bomb that makes him a walking apocalypse. The story behind it, Gale explains, starts with ambition and ends in disaster. As these stories usually do. He was a prodigy from childhood, able to cast spells most wizards struggle with for years. By age 8, he could conjure a fireball, a feat that should have been impossible for someone so young. His talent was raw and undeniable, and it caught the attention of Mystra herself, the goddess of magic, the embodiment of the weave through which all arcane power flows. "She chose me," Gale says softly, "made me one of her chosen, taught me secrets of magic that had been lost for centuries, showed me wonders that would drive most mortal minds to madness." He pauses, and something complicated crosses his face. "We became lovers." There's an uncomfortable silence around the fire. A goddess and a mortal, the ultimate power imbalance. But Gale continues, voice distant with memory. "In the realm where gods and mortals can meet, Mystra showed him the true nature of the weave, the underlying structure of magical reality itself. She made him feel special, chosen, important beyond any mortal wizard's dreams." But it wasn't enough for Gale. He wanted to prove himself truly worthy of her love, wanted to give her a gift that would demonstrate his devotion. He learned of a tome containing a fragment of the Karsite weave, a piece of ancient Netherese magic that had been lost since that empire's catastrophic fall. If he could recover it and present it to Mystra, surely she would understand how much he was willing to risk for her. "I was an idiot," Gale says flatly. "The tome I found didn't contain magic. It was magic, corrupted and twisted and hungry. The moment I opened it, it leaped into my chest and became part of me." Mystra's reaction was immediate and brutal. She severed their connection, stripped him of his status as her chosen, cast him aside like a child who'd broken a valuable toy. No forgiveness, no understanding that he'd been trying to honor her. Just cold, divine rejection and the knowledge that he now carried something that would eventually kill him and everyone around him. Gale retreated to his tower in Waterdeep, accompanied only by Tara, his Tressim companion, a winged cat more intelligent than most humans. There he spent months in isolation, feeding magical artifacts to the orb in his chest, desperately trying to keep it stable. Each artifact bought him a few more days, maybe a week. He was slowly eating his way through centuries of magical history, consuming priceless relics just to survive a little longer. "The tadpole has stabilized it somewhat," Gale says, and there's bitter irony in his voice. "The thing that should have killed me is the only reason I'm not already dead. Though stable is perhaps generous. The orb still hungers. I can feel it, always, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness." He looks around at the others, at these people who've been traveling with what amounts to a magical bomb for weeks without fully understanding the danger. "I keep thinking Mystra will take me back if I prove myself worthy again. If I'm useful enough, powerful enough, if I suffer enough penance for my arrogance." He laughs quietly. "But increasingly, I wonder if that's what I actually want. Or if I've just been conditioned to believe a goddess's approval is the only thing that matters." The fire crackles, and someone asks about Tara, clearly trying to lighten the mood. Gale's face softens immediately. He speaks about his Tressim companion, how she's cared for him through everything, how she's probably worried sick, wondering where he is. He talks about his tower and its library, thousands of books collected over years of passionate study. "Magic has been my whole life," Gale says. "Not just casting spells, but understanding the fundamental nature of reality, the patterns that underlie existence itself. The weave it's beautiful in ways I struggle to articulate. Touching it is like touching divinity." He meets their eyes. "But I'm learning that power isn't everything. That knowledge shared is more valuable than knowledge hoarded. That maybe the warmth of friendship is worth as much as the most glorious spell." His hands move unconsciously as he speaks, tracing patterns in the air that shimmer briefly with arcane energy before fading. Magic is his language, his art, his purpose. But here, surrounded by people who value him for more than his magical abilities, Gale is beginning to understand that he can be more than just Mystra's cast-off chosen. He can be himself, whoever that turns out to be beneath the ambition and the orb and the desperate need for divine approval. The fire burns lower, and Gale falls into comfortable silence, content to listen as others share their burdens. He's still carrying a bomb in his chest, still facing eventual detonation or transformation or some other terrible end. But tonight, just for tonight, that seems almost bearable. The fire flares suddenly, sparks spiraling upward, and Karlach laughs with pure delight. The tiefling barbarian has been tending the flames all evening, her movements careful despite her considerable strength. She radiates heat, literal, physical warmth that has nothing to do with the campfire and everything to do with the infernal engine burning where her heart used to be. "I haven't touched another person in 10 years, she says suddenly, and the cheerfulness drops from her voice like a mask. "Not a hug, not a handshake, not even a high five after a good fight. Anyone who touches me gets burned." She holds up her hands, studies them in the firelight. "I spent a decade in the hells watching everyone else have what I couldn't. Comfort, connection, the simple warmth of skin on skin. It was almost worse than the fighting." Karlach's story starts in Baldur's Gate, in the outer city where she grew up, happy and loved. Her parents, Pluck and Karlach Cliffgate, raised her right, taught her to defend those weaker than herself, to stand up for what's good, to use her considerable strength for protection rather than cruelty. She became a bodyguard, using her size and skill to keep people safe. That's how she met Enver Gortash. He seemed like a good employer, someone who appreciated her loyalty and paid fairly for her services. She trusted him, considered him almost a friend. It was the greatest mistake of her life. Gortash sold her to the archdevil Zariel like she was property, traded her for infernal weapons and political favors. Karlach woke up in Avernus, the first layer of the 9 hells, with no memory of how she got there and no understanding of why. Zariel ripped out her heart and replaced it with an infernal engine, a mechanical device fueled by hell fire that grants immense strength but burns too hot for any living thing to safely touch. For 10 years, Karlach fought in the Blood War, the eternal conflict between devils and demons, a war that's raged since the dawn of creation, with no end in sight. She killed demons by the hundreds, by the thousands. Not because she believed in Zariel's cause, but because the alternative was death or endless torture. She became one of Zariel's most valuable soldiers, and she hated every second of it. The worst part wasn't the violence, Karlach says quietly. I mean, it was horrible, don't get me wrong. But the loneliness... She trails off, and for a moment her fierce optimism cracks to reveal the pain underneath. Watching the other soldiers find moments of connection, seeing them comfort each other after battles, and knowing I could never have that. The engine burns so hot that even in the hells, I couldn't be touched without causing pain. Then came the Nautiloid, the Mind Flayer ship that crashed into Avernus during a raid. Karlach saw her chance and took it, fought her way aboard through chaos and mind flayers and worse. Freedom was worth any risk, even transformation into an illithid. Miraculously, she escaped, crash-landed back in the material plane near the city she thought she'd never see again. But freedom came with a price. Zariel's forces are hunting her, determined to drag her back. The so-called Paladins of Tyre have been sent to kill her, deceived into believing she's a dangerous devil that must be destroyed. And Wyll, good-hearted Wyll, who she's grown to care for so deeply, was tricked by his patron into hunting her too, told she was a heartless monster when nothing could be further from the truth. She speaks of Dammon now, the tiefling smith who's been working miracles with the engine. He's managed to cool it enough that she can have brief physical contact, a hug that lasts 5 seconds before the heat becomes too much, holding a hand for a moment before having to let go. It's progress, incredible progress, but it's not the same as being able to reach out whenever she wants without fear. Gortash is here, Karlach says, and there's steel in her voice now. In Baldur's Gate, probably living well off whatever power he gained by selling me. Part of me wants revenge, so badly I can taste it. But part of me wonders if revenge will fix anything, if it'll bring back the years I lost or the life that was stolen. What Karlach wants most is simply to live, to walk the streets of her home city as a free woman, to visit her parents' graves and tell them she's okay, to eat good food and drink good wine and dance until dawn, to fall in love properly, to experience all the physical and emotional intimacy the engine has denied her, to have a future that's more than just survival. The camp has become precious to her precisely because it offers glimpses of that future. Here, surrounded by people who know her story and accept her anyway, she can be herself without pretense. She can laugh and joke, share her fears and hopes, cry when the weight becomes too much. These people have become her family, the found family that matters just as much as blood. As the conversation continues, Karlach's hand unconsciously moves toward Wyll's, stops just short of touching. The longing in that aborted gesture is almost painful to witness. But then she smiles, fierce and genuine, because if there's one thing 10 years in hell taught her, it's that hope is a choice you make every day. And tonight, surrounded by firelight and friendship, choosing hope feels almost easy. Where Karlach radiates warmth and openness, Lae'zel is all sharp edges and controlled intensity. The githyanki fighter sits with perfect posture, her angular features stern in the firelight, her yellow eyes reflecting the flames like a predator's. She does not naturally participate in these soft conversations. seeing them as a waste of time that could be better spent training or planning strategy. But tonight, perhaps recognizing the value of understanding one's allies. She speaks. Her voice is clipped, precise, each word chosen with care and delivered with absolute conviction. Lae'zel speaks of the Githyanki people, her people, a warrior race descended from slaves who threw off the mind, Flea's chains millennia ago. The mother Gith led the rebellion, and her memory is sacred, a rallying point for all Githyanki who value freedom above all else. But freedom, Lae'zel is beginning to realize, is a complicated concept among her people. They are ruled by Vlaakith, the 157th, called the Lich Queen, an undead sovereign who has held power for over 1,000 years. Vlaakith demands absolute loyalty from her subjects, and questioning her wisdom is the gravest heresy imaginable. Until very recently, Lae'zel never thought to question, never imagined there might be a reason to doubt. She was raised in a creche, a githyanki training facility, where she learned from the earliest age that her purpose was to fight, to prove herself worthy, to ascend through the ranks until she might earn the honor of serving Vlaakith directly. The Githyanki have no room for weakness, no patience for sentiment or mercy. You are useful or you are worthless, a warrior or a corpse waiting to happen. Lae'zel excelled in her training. She mastered the greatsword, learned to channel her people's psychic abilities, proved herself in combat again and again. When she was chosen for the mission that led to her capture by the Mind Flayers, it was a mark of distinction, a recognition of her skills and potential. Being taken by the enemy, being infected with a tadpole, should have been her end. By Githyanki standards, she should have died the moment the parasite entered her skull rather than risk transformation. But she didn't die, and the tadpole hasn't transformed her. This contradiction gnaws at Lae'zel, challenges everything she was taught about the illithid threat. More troubling still are the whispers she's beginning to hear, suggestions that Vlaakith is not the benevolent sovereign she claims to be, that the Lich Queen has her own agenda that may not align with the good of the Githyanki people. There is a Prince Orpheus imprisoned in the astral prism that Shadowheart guards. He is the true heir to the Githyanki legacy, son of the mother Gith herself, and Vlaakith wants him dead. Why would the rightful ruler need to be executed unless there is something the Lich Queen wishes to hide? These thoughts are dangerous, treasonous, but Lae'zel cannot silence them entirely. She speaks of her people's relationship with dragons, the ancient pact that binds red dragons to serve as mounts for the most elite Githyanki warriors. It is a system of mutual respect and power, dragons who recognize strength and Githyanki who prove themselves worthy. Lae'zel dreams of the day she might ride a dragon into battle, a fantasy that now seems impossibly distant given her current circumstances. The others in camp perplex her. They are soft in ways that would get a Githyanki killed, making decisions based on emotion rather than logic, showing mercy to enemies who might strike again. And yet, their approach has succeeded where pure ruthlessness might have failed. They have forged alliances, gathered information, survived encounters that should have killed them through cooperation rather than domination. Particularly confounding is her relationship with Shadowheart. The two should be natural enemies, the warrior and the priest, the Githyanki and the half-elf, the servant of Vlaakith and the devotee of Shar. They clash constantly, each convinced of the superiority of their own worldview. But Lae'zel has also come to respect the cleric's skills, to appreciate her pragmatism, if not her methods. There might even be something approaching friendship developing between them, though Lae'zel would die before admitting it. She speaks of the istik, the word her people use for those who are not Githyanki. It is not necessarily an insult, simply a classification, a recognition that other races operate by different rules and values. Lae'zel is learning that istik can be capable warriors, that they possess their own forms of strength and honor. It is a humbling realization for one raised to believe in githyanki supremacy. The tadpole complicates everything. By rights, Lae'zel should seek purification, should beg Vlaakith's healers to remove the parasite, even if the process kills her. But the tadpole also grants certain abilities, psychic connections that might prove useful. And increasingly, Lae'zel suspects that rushing to the githyanki for help might not result in the salvation she was promised. Her faith is wavering, and for a githyanki warrior, that is terrifying. Faith in Vlaakith, faith in the righteousness of her people's cause, faith in the certainty of the path she was meant to walk. All of it is being challenged by her experiences with this strange group. She is being forced to think for herself, to make decisions based on her own judgment rather than the dictates of her superiors. Lae'zel does not speak of these doubts easily or often. To do so feels like weakness, like betrayal of everything she was raised to value. But here, in the safety of camp, surrounded by people who have proven themselves in battle and in trust, she allows herself to wonder. What if there is more to strength than violence? What if loyalty can be earned rather than demanded? What if the path of honor is not always the path Vlaakith has laid out? She falls silent, her expression unreadable, and the fire crackles on. Lae'zel has said more than she intended, revealed more vulnerability than she is comfortable with. But the others do not mock her or push for more. They simply acknowledge her words with nods and understanding glances, and that acceptance is perhaps the greatest challenge to her worldview yet. These Istik understand honor in their own way, and it is not inferior to the githyanki code, merely different. The firelight catches on the rippled horns that crown Wyll's head, a recent addition to his appearance and a constant reminder of the price he's paid for his choices. The Blade of Frontiers, as the people call him, a folk hero, known throughout the Sword Coast for his monster-hunting prowess and his willingness to help those in need. But the reality behind the legend is far more complicated than the songs suggest. Wyll speaks in the measured tones of someone educated in nobility, because that's exactly what he is. His father, Ulder Ravengard, is one of the Grand Dukes who rule Baldur's Gate, a man of honor and principle who raised his son to value duty and service above personal gain. Wyll loved his father, admired him deeply, wanted nothing more than to make him proud. When Wyll was 17, he uncovered a plot to summon Tiamat, the five-headed dragon queen, within the walls of Baldur's Gate. The cult was powerful, well-funded, beyond anything a young noble with sword training could hope to stop alone. He needed power, needed it desperately, and he was willing to pay any price to save his city and the people he loved. Enter Mizora, a Cambion, a devil with skin red as blood and charm as sweet as honey. She offered him exactly what he needed, the power of a warlock's pact, abilities that would let him fight monsters far beyond his natural capabilities. In exchange, she asked only that he serve her, follow her commands, do as she directed. It seemed like a fair trade, power for servitude, especially when the alternative was watching his home burn. Wyll accepted the pact and stopped the cult. He saved Baldur's Gate, became a hero, everything he'd dreamed of being. But there was a cost. His father, learning that his son had made a pact with the devil, was furious and ashamed. Ulder couldn't understand, couldn't see past the diabolic nature of the agreement to recognize the good his son had done. He cast Wyll out, and the young man found himself alone, rejected by the person whose approval mattered most. So Wyll became the Blade of Frontiers, a wandering hero who helped people in need and hunted monsters that threatened the innocent. He crafted a persona, a legend, someone brave and selfless and uncomplicated. The reality was far messier. Every monster he slew, every person he saved, it was all done in service to Mizora's agenda. She owned him, body and soul, and she never let him forget it. The horns are her latest punishment. Mizora sent him to kill Karlach, describing her as a devil escaped from Avernus, a dangerous creature that needed to be destroyed. But Karlach turned out to be a victim, not a villain, a woman enslaved and tortured who had finally managed to escape. Wyll couldn't kill her, refused to carry out the order even knowing there would be consequences. Mizora transformed him as punishment, gave him these infernal horns, and altered his appearance to mark him as devil-touched. It was meant to humiliate him, to brand him as irredeemably tainted in the eyes of those he'd sought to help. Instead, it freed him in a way. The facade of the perfect hero was shattered, and what remained was simply Wyll, a man trying to do the right thing despite the terrible contract that binds him. He speaks of his father with longing and pain. Baldur is somewhere in the city, possibly in danger, definitely in need of the help only his son can provide. But approaching him means confronting the rejection, means facing the possibility that even saving his father won't earn back the love and respect Wyll lost. It means admitting that he's still bound to Mizora, still tainted by the pact he made all those years ago. Wyll's relationship with the other companions is complex. He admires Karlach's resilience and strength, feels a deep connection to her that goes beyond simple friendship. They share an understanding born of similar betrayals, both of them pawns in devil's games, both of them struggling to reclaim their autonomy. There's the possibility of something more between them, a romance built on mutual respect and shared trauma. With Lae'zel, there's tension. She respects strength, but has little patience for what she sees as Wyll's weakness, his unwillingness to simply break the pact regardless of the cost. To her, the solution is simple: defy Mizora, face the consequences, die if necessary, rather than continue in servitude. But Wyll knows it's not that simple. The pact is binding in ways that transcend simple will, magical chains that cannot be broken through determination alone. He finds one's unexpected kinship with Gale, another man who made choices in the pursuit of love and power that led to terrible consequences. They can commiserate over the burdens they carry, the metaphorical and literal bombs that tick away in their respective chests. And with Astarion, there's a strange mirror, one man bound to a devil and another to a vampire lord, both seeking freedom from their masters. The folk tales that glorify the Blade of Frontiers ring hollow to Wyll now. He knows the truth behind the legend, knows that every heroic deed was tainted by his servitude to Mizora. But he also knows that the good he's done is real, that the people he's saved didn't care about his motives, only his actions. Perhaps there's redemption in that, a way to find meaning in service even when the service itself is compelled. As he speaks, his hand unconsciously touches one of the horns, a habit he's developing, a physical reminder of the price of defiance. But he doesn't regret saving Karlach, wouldn't change that choice even knowing the cost. There are lines he won't cross, principles he won't compromise, even for a devil who owns his soul. The fire burns low, and Wyll adds fuel, his movements practiced and efficient. He's a capable man, someone who has learned to find purpose in difficult circumstances, to maintain hope even when the future seems uncertain. The others in camp trust him, respect him, and that matters more than any ballad sung in taverns about the legendary Blade of Frontiers. The conversations ebb and flow like the tide, sometimes animated and passionate, other times quiet and contemplative. The fire has burned for hours now, fed carefully by various members of the group, its light the only barrier between the camp and the darkness of the surrounding night. But that darkness doesn't feel threatening anymore. It feels protective, a blanket wrapped around this small circle of safety and trust. Someone mentions food, and suddenly there's a flurry of activity as people dig through packs and produce the hodgepodge collection of supplies gathered throughout the day's travels. There's bread, only slightly stale, and cheese that's aged a bit more than intended. Someone produces a few apples, and Gale manages to conjure up something that approximates tea, the steam rising from battered tin cups to join the smoke from the fire. The meal is simple, far from the feasts that some of them knew in their previous lives, but it's shared, and that makes it special. Karlach laughs as she tries to handle a particularly hot piece of bread, her touch turning it nearly to charcoal before she can pass it to someone else. Astarion makes a show of declining all offers of food, though he accepts wine when it's produced, savoring it with an expression of genuine pleasure. They talk of lighter things now, the weight of their individual burdens set aside for the moment. Wyll tells a story about one of his early monster hunting jobs that went comically wrong, involving a supposed vampire that turned out to be a very old man with very sharp teeth and a love of dramatic costumes. Even Lae'zel cracks something that might generously be called a smile. Shadowheart produces a bottle that she claims she's been saving for a special occasion. It's nothing fancy, just decent wine from somewhere in the Sword Coast, but the gesture touches everyone. This moment, this ordinary evening around the campfire, qualifies as special. Not because anything momentous has happened, but because they're all here, alive, together, having survived another day in a world that seems determined to kill them. Gale, warming to the atmosphere, begins explaining a theory he's been developing about the nature of the tadpoles and their connection to the Absolute. About halfway through his second point, Astarion throws a small stick at him with impeccable accuracy, and the wizard laughs, acknowledging that perhaps deep magical theory isn't appropriate fireside entertainment. He promises to corner anyone interested later, which everyone wisely pretends not to hear. The night deepens. Stars appear overhead, brilliant and uncountable, the same stars that have watched over this world since long before any of them were born. There's something humbling about that perspective, the recognition that their struggles, as important as they feel, are small compared to the vast sweep of history and time. But that doesn't make them meaningless. If anything, it makes these moments more precious. These connections they're forming, this unlikely family bound together by parasites and circumstance. It matters precisely because it's temporary, because nothing lasts forever, because they're choosing to care for each other despite every reason not to. One by one, people begin to drift toward their bedrolls. Not because the conversation has ended or the fire has died, but because the day has been long and tomorrow promises to be longer. There's a comfortable silence now, the kind that only exists between people who have moved past the need to fill every quiet moment with words. Shadowheart settles into her bedroll, but doesn't immediately close her eyes. She watches the fire, her expression softer than usual, thinking about the memories she's lost and the ones she's gaining. Astarion lies on his back, staring up at the stars, marveling that they're the same stars he glimpsed through windows during his centuries of captivity. Yet somehow they look entirely different now. Gale sits with his book open but unread, thinking about Mystra and magic, and whether either of those things are really what he needs to find: fulfillment. Karlach adds one final log to the fire, stoking it carefully to ensure it will last through the night, her way of protecting the others, even in sleep. Lae'zel has already arranged her bedroll with military precision, her weapons within easy reach, but she's not asleep yet. She's thinking about honor and duty, and whether the two are always the same thing. Wyll stares into the flames, seeing in them both his father's disappointment and Karlach's smile, trying to reconcile the person he was with the person he's becoming. The camp is settling, finding its rhythm, and there's a peace here that none of them expected to find. They're still infected with mind flayer tadpoles, still racing against time to find a cure, still facing threats that could end them at any moment. But right now, in this quiet space between sleeping and waking, between danger and danger, they have this. They have each other. They have the fire's warmth and the star's light. They have stories shared and burdens acknowledged. They have the knowledge that they're not alone, that whatever tomorrow brings, they'll face it together. And for tonight, for this moment, that's enough. A new presence approaches the fire, moving with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in the natural world. Halsin, the elf druid, is larger than most of his kind, his frame speaking to strength earned through years of defending the grove and its inhabitants. His face is weathered in a way that suggests experience rather than age, though by elven standards, he has lived many long decades. Halsin was not always with this group. He came to them through circumstance, rescued from captivity in the goblin camp, where he'd been held after attempting to investigate the cult of the Absolute. But his story stretches back far further than his recent troubles, and tonight, warmed by the fire and the company, he's willing to share some of it. He speaks of the Emerald Grove, the druid sanctuary he led for many years. It was a place of balance and growth, where nature and civilization found harmony, where refugees could find shelter and druids could tend to the wild places that still existed in an increasingly settled world. Halsin loved the grove, devoted himself to its protection and prosperity, but he also felt the weight of leadership, the burden of being responsible for so many lives and choices. The shadow curse is what draws his focus now, a blight that has corrupted the land for over a century, turning what was once beautiful into something twisted and wrong. Halsin has made it his mission to lift this curse, to restore balance to the corrupted lands. It's more than just a druid's duty to heal the natural world. It's personal, connected to events from his past that still haunt him. He speaks carefully about his time in the Underdark, captured by drow raiders when he was younger and less experienced. 3 years he spent as their prisoner, 3 years of darkness and cruelty that would have broken many people. But Halsin endured and eventually escaped, bringing with him scars both visible and hidden. He doesn't dwell on the details, doesn't seek pity or even understanding. It is simply part of his story, a chapter that shaped who he became. Halsin's philosophy is one of balance. Nature, he explains, is neither good nor evil. It simply is. A wolf that hunts a rabbit is not cruel. It is merely surviving. A storm that destroys a village is not malicious. It is simply weather following its pattern. The role of a druid is not to prevent nature from being nature, but to help maintain the equilibrium that allows all things to thrive. But the shadow curse is different. It is not natural death or natural change. It is corruption, a wound in the world that festers and spreads, that turns life into unlife, that breaks the cycles that should govern growth and decay. Healing such a wound requires more than druidic magic. It requires understanding the source of the corruption, confronting the pain and trauma that birthed it, finding a way to bring resolution to events that happened long before any of the current generation were born. He speaks of Oak Father Sylvanus, the deity he serves, the embodiment of nature in all its forms. Druids who follow Sylvanus understand that they are not separate from nature, but part of it, that their magic is not control over the natural world, but cooperation with it. To shapeshift into a bear or a wolf or an owl bear is not to master those creatures, but to embrace what they are, to experience the world through their senses and perspectives. Halsin's connection to the current group is different from their connections to each other. He is older, more experienced, less caught up in the immediate desperation of the tadpole crisis. Not that he doesn't care about finding a cure, but his perspective is longer, broader. He has seen centuries of problems that seemed unsolvable eventually find resolution. He has learned patience, though he's also learned that patience must be balanced with action. He watches the younger members of the group with something approaching parental fondness. Karlach's fierce joy reminds him why he fights to protect the grove and its people. Wyll's determination to do right despite impossible circumstances echoes the best traditions of druidic service. Even Astarion's struggle to reclaim his autonomy speaks to the fundamental right of all creatures to self-determination. With Shadowheart, there's a particular tension. Her devotion to Shar, goddess of darkness and loss, runs counter to everything Halsin believes about the importance of memory and growth. But he also recognizes that she is on a journey, that the rigid certainty she clings to is beginning to crack, and he's willing to give her space to find her own path rather than trying to force her down his. The shadow curse weighs on him constantly, a responsibility he cannot set aside even for a night's rest. But here, in the warmth of the fire, he allows himself a moment of peace. The land will still be cursed tomorrow. The goblins will still threaten the grove. The Absolute will still be gathering power. But tonight, there is this fire, these people, this moment of connection and calm. Halsin speaks of hope, not the desperate, grasping hope of someone who has no other options, but the deep, patient hope of someone who has seen the world endure and heal from terrible wounds before. The shadow curse can be lifted, the grove can be saved, balance can be restored. It will take time, sacrifice, wisdom, and more than a little luck, but it is possible. As he talks, his hands move unconsciously, shaping small magics, encouraging a flower to bloom near the fire's edge, coaxing a night bird to land briefly on his shoulder before flying off into the darkness. Nature responds to him because he understands it, not as a force to be commanded, but as a partner to be respected. The others listen, finding comfort in his certainty, in the reminder that they are part of something larger than their individual struggles. The world is ancient and vast, and it will endure long after they're gone. But what they do matters. The choices they make ripple outward, affecting not just themselves, but everyone and everything they touch. Halsin eventually falls silent, content to simply tend the fire and watch over the camp as the others drift toward sleep. He is a protector by nature, most comfortable when he can ensure the safety of those he cares about. And these people, this strange collection of damaged souls and unlikely heroes, have become important to him. He will see them through this crisis if he can, will lend his strength and wisdom to their cause, will stand between them and danger whenever possible. The fire crackles, and Halsin adds another log, a smile touching his weathered face. Despite everything, despite the curses and the cults and the parasites, there is beauty in this moment. There is life, and where there is life, there is hope. The night has reached that perfect point where everyone is comfortable enough to truly relax, but not so tired that sleep is irresistible. Conversation flows more easily now, jumping from topic to topic without the weight of earlier confessions and revelations. This is the time for lighter stories, for teasing and laughter, for the kind of bonding that happens when people let their guards down completely. Someone brings up the first time they saw Gale try to cook, and the wizard protests loudly but good-naturedly that he was simply experimenting with magical enhancement of flavors, and it wasn't his fault that the pot developed sentience and tried to escape. Astarion adds that the pot showed remarkably good judgment in its attempt to flee, earning him a piece of bread to the head from an indignant Gale. Karlach shares a story about her early days in Avernus, a tale that starts grim, but somehow ends with her accidentally starting. A philosophical debate between two demons about the nature of evil, which led to them being so distracted that she was able to escape an impossible situation. The way she tells it, with animated gestures and different voices for each demon, has everyone laughing despite the horror underlying the situation. Wyll admits that the first time he tried to use his warlock powers, he accidentally set his own hair on fire, which is why he learned to favor that particular swept-back style. Mizora thought it was hilarious, of course, and made sure to remind him of it regularly. There's pain in the admission, but also humor, the kind that comes from being able to laugh at yourself. Even Lae'zel participates, though her stories tend toward the martial. She describes a training exercise where she had to disarm a superior officer using only her mind and a piece of rope, and the creative solution she devised that technically met the requirements while also earning her a week of additional drills for insubordination. There's almost pride in her voice, a recognition that even in a society as rigid as the githyanki, there's value in creative thinking. Shadowheart's contributions are more guarded, but she shares a few observations about the group's dynamics that are sharp without being cruel. She has a gift for noticing small details, the way Astarion always positions himself where he can see all entrances, the way Karlach unconsciously moves closer to the fire whenever she's feeling particularly vulnerable, the way Wyll's hand goes to his sword hilt whenever anyone raises their voice, an old habit from his monster hunting days. The observations could feel invasive, but Shadowheart delivers them with a gentleness that makes them feel like acknowledgement rather than judgment. She sees these people, really sees them, and she's learning to care about what she sees, even when it frightens her to do so. Halsin shares stories from the Grove, tales of druids in training who turned themselves into animals and then forgot how to change back, requiring lengthy interventions and increasingly creative solutions. There's a story about a young druid who became a squirrel and proceeded to hide acorns all over the grove, forgetting that he'd done so when he changed back, and then kept finding random acorns in his belongings for months afterward. The laughter is genuine, unforced, a sound that seems out of place in a world as dangerous as the one they're navigating. But that's exactly why it matters. Life cannot be all struggle and survival. There must be moments of joy, of connection, of simple human, or elven, or tiefling, or githyanki warmth. Astarion produces a bottle from somewhere in his pack, something he claims to have liberated from a particularly pretentious merchant's caravan. The wine is excellent, far better than anything they've had recently, and while he can't partake himself, he takes pleasure in watching the others enjoy it. This is a kind of intimacy he can participate in, sharing pleasure without the complications of physical contact. Someone suggests a game, and soon they're engaged in a complicated storytelling exercise where each person adds a sentence to an evolving narrative. The story becomes increasingly absurd, involving a dragon who's afraid of heights, a paladin who swore an oath to protect all cheese, and a bard whose instrument was possessed by the ghost of a very judgmental music critic. Gale tries to steer the story toward something more coherent, but he's overruled by collective agreement that coherence is overrated. Even he has to admit that the resulting tale, while making absolutely no sense, is entertaining in its chaos. It's a reminder that not everything needs to be structured or meaningful, that sometimes nonsense is its own reward. The fire continues to burn, steady and warm, and the sounds of laughter and conversation blend with the crackling logs and the gentle night sounds of the forest. This is what they're fighting for, really. Not abstract concepts of good versus evil or heroic destinies, but this, the right to sit around a fire with people you care about and laugh at stupid stories. The freedom to be yourself, quirks and flaws and all. and know that you're accepted. For people like Astarion and Karlach, who spent years unable to experience simple pleasures, these moments are precious beyond measure. For Wyll, who spent so long crafting a heroic persona, it's a relief to just be himself, clumsy cooking attempts and all. For Lae'zel, raised in a culture with no room for frivolity, it's a revelation that strength and joy can coexist. Shadowheart watches them all, and somewhere in her heart, beneath the layers of Sharan teaching and forced forgetfulness, something warm and genuine takes root. These people, with all their damage and their hope, their trauma and their laughter, they matter to her. It's terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. The night grows deeper, and gradually the energy shifts from raucous to gentle, from laughter to soft smiles, from stories to contemplative silence. They're not ready to sleep yet, but the wild energy of earlier has settled into something calmer, more sustainable. The fire has burned down to a bed of glowing coals, radiating steady warmth without the dramatic flames of earlier. Someone should probably add more wood, but no one moves to do so yet, content to let the embers glow and pulse like a sleeping heartbeat. Above, the sky is a vast canvas of stars, more visible now that the fire's brightness has dimmed. Gale, predictably, begins to point out constellations, naming them and sharing the stories behind their forms. The others half listen, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of his voice, even if they're not tracking every detail. There's the crown, and there's the warrior. And that cluster there represents a legendary dragon from ancient tales. But Halsin gently corrects a few of his interpretations, explaining that the druids see different patterns in the same stars, groupings that emphasize natural cycles rather than heroic narratives. The same stars, two different stories, both valid, both meaningful to those who read them. It's a metaphor none of them miss, though none of them comment on it directly. Astarion mentions that he's barely seen stars in 200 years, confined as he was to Cazador's palace and permitted to hunt only on the darkest nights. These stars, the same celestial lights that have watched over Faerun since time immemorial, might as well be new to him. Every time he looks up, he's struck by the vastness of what he'd forgotten, the sheer beauty of a world he'd been denied. Karlach talks about how different the sky looked in Avernus, tinted red by eternal hellfire, the stars obscured by smoke and ash. She spent 10 years dreaming of this sky, of the clean darkness and the pure light of stars unfiltered by infernal corruption. Being able to lie on her back and simply look up feels like a luxury beyond price. Lae'zel speaks of the astral plane, where the githyanki make their home, a realm where the stars are not distant points of light, but living currents of energy that can be navigated and traveled. She admits, though grudgingly, that there's something appealing about these fixed, stable stars, the way they mark time and season, the way they offer constancy in an ever-changing world. Shadowheart is quiet, but she's listening, absorbing these different perspectives on something as simple and profound as the night sky. Shar's teachings emphasize the darkness between the stars, the void that gives the lights meaning. But maybe there's value in the lights themselves, in the connections people make when they look up together and find patterns in the chaos. Wyll remembers studying astronomy as a child, part of his noble education. He learned to navigate by the stars, to use their positions to determine direction and time. It was abstract. Knowledge, then, something useful but not particularly meaningful. Now, lying here under that same sky with these people, the knowledge feels different, warmer, more personal. They talk about the future, carefully, tentatively. None of them want to think too hard about what comes after they find a cure for the tadpoles, after they defeat the Absolute, after this strange fellowship dissolves as it inevitably must. But they also can't help but wonder, Will they go their separate ways? Will they maintain contact? Will they miss each other? Or will they be relieved to return to their individual lives? Halsin suggests that perhaps the bonds they're forming will last beyond the immediate crisis. Friendships forged in adversity often prove more durable than those formed in comfort. They've seen each other at their worst and their best, have trusted each other with secrets and vulnerabilities, have fought beside each other and argued and reconciled. Gale jokes about writing a book about their adventures, which earns him groans from everyone except Lae'zel, who asks seriously whether such a book would bring her honor or shame. Astarion votes for shame, maximum shame. Please ensure all the embarrassing bits are prominently featured. Karlach suggests they'd need at least 3 volumes just to cover all the times Gale has explained something at excessive length. But beneath the humor, there's real affection, the kind that can only develop between people who have shared what they've shared. They're not just allies or traveling companions anymore. They're something closer to family, chosen family, the kind you pick for yourself rather than the kind you're born into. Shadowheart wonders aloud whether Shar would approve of these connections she's forming, and the answer is almost certainly no. The goddess of loss would want her to let these people go, to embrace the inevitable loneliness of her path. But for the first time, Shadowheart questions whether that's what she wants, whether the path she's on is truly the right one for her. The stars continue their slow wheel across the sky, marking the passage of time in the oldest way humans and elves and all the other races of Faerun have known. The coals pulse with fading warmth, and one by one, despite their reluctance to end this perfect evening, the companions begin to drift toward genuine sleep. The fire has burned down to embers, glowing red beneath a layer of ash. The stars have wheeled across half the sky, marking hours that have passed in what felt like minutes. One by one, the companions have drifted toward their bedrolls, exhausted by honesty, drained by vulnerability, but somehow lighter for having shared their burdens. Shadowheart sleeps curled on her side, one hand near the artifact she guards, the other tucked beneath her pillow. For once, her face is relaxed, unmarked by the pain that usually creases her features. Whatever she dreams about, it's gentler than the nightmares that usually wake her. Astarion lies very still in his trance, as vampire spawn do, but there's no tension in his frame. He is, for this moment, simply at rest, free from Cazador's influence, free from the need to perform or manipulate. The moonlight he spent 200 years dreaming about bathes his pale face. Gale has somehow tangled himself impossibly in his blankets, his book open on his chest, though he's certainly not reading it. He mutters in his sleep, fragments of incantations and theories, his dreaming mind still fascinated by magic, even when his waking mind has finally shut down. The orb in his chest pulses gently, feeding on his magical energy, patient and terrible and inevitable. Karlach generates enough heat that blankets should be unnecessary, but she's wrapped in them anyway, making up for 10 years of being unable to touch without pain. She snores softly, her expression content in a way her waking face rarely manages. The infernal engine in her chest burns steady, constant reminder of what was stolen and what might yet be reclaimed. Lae'zel sleeps as a warrior does, alert even in rest, her greatsword within arm's reach, her body disciplined and controlled. But her face, usually so stern, has softened slightly. She dreams, perhaps, of a githyanki empire that doesn't require blind obedience, of honor that can be questioned without being lost. Wyll curls slightly in sleep, one hand near his rapier, the horns on his head catching faint starlight. His face is peaceful in a way it rarely is when he's awake and maintaining his heroic persona. The pact mark burns invisible beneath his skin, but tonight, for a few hours at least, he isn't the blade of frontiers. He's just Wyll, exhausted and hopeful and human. Halsin sits watch, as he often does, his elven nature requiring less sleep than most. He tends the fire with careful attention, adding just enough wood to keep it alive through the night. This protective instinct runs bone deep, this need to ensure his people, and yes, they've become his people, can rest without fear. The forest around them pulses with nocturnal life. An owl calls, leaves rustle. The world continues its ancient patterns, indifferent to individual struggles, yet somehow making space for this small circle of warmth and safety. Here's the thing about the tadpoles. The truth none of them have fully articulated yet. They should all be dead, or worse. The transformation into mind flayers typically takes hours, maybe days. It's been weeks now, and they're all still themselves, still capable of love and fear and hope, still human enough to sit around a fire and share stories. The parasite that should have destroyed them has instead become the thing holding them together. The psychic connection it creates means they can't fully lie to each other, can't maintain the walls that usually keep people separate and alone. They feel each other's pain, sense each other's truth, experience an intimacy that most people never achieve in lifetimes of trying. Maybe that's the real horror of the tadpole, not that it will transform them into monsters, but that it's transforming them into something more vulnerable than they've ever been, more open, more connected, more human, paradoxically, than they were before a parasite crawled into their brains. Morning will come eventually. With it will come new dangers, new impossible choices, new reasons to despair. The tadpoles are still there, counting down to some transformation none of them fully understand. The Absolute is still growing in power. Their individual burdens, orbs and engines and curses and pacts, still weigh heavy. But they faced tonight together. They shared their worst truths and weren't rejected. They revealed their deepest shames and found acceptance. They admitted their fears and discovered they weren't alone. That counts for something. Maybe everything. The embers pulse like a heartbeat, steady and sure, keeping watch as the sleepers dream. In those dreams, perhaps, they find versions of themselves they thought were lost. Shadowheart before Shar stole her name, Astarion before Cazador broke him, Gale before ambition consumed him, Karlach before hell claimed her, Lae'zel before dogma blinded her, Wyll before the pact bound him. Or perhaps they dream of the future, of versions of themselves that don't exist yet, but might, if they survive long enough. Versions that are free and whole and happy. Versions that are possible only because they found each other, because they chose connection over isolation, because they refused to face the darkness alone. The stars continue their vigil overhead. The camp rests safe and warm and together for one more precious night. The thing that should have killed them all has instead given them this. A family forged from parasites and desperation, built on honesty forced by psychic connection, stronger than any of them could have imagined. Tomorrow, they'll wake to new horrors. Tonight, they have each other. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Thank you for joining us by the fire tonight, traveler. If these stories brought you peace, if the warmth reached you wherever you are, please consider subscribing to Sleepable Gaming Lore. Every like, every share, every kind word helps us continue creating these cozy spaces where game lore and restful sleep can meet. Until next time, may your rest be peaceful your dreams be kind, and may you always find companions worth fighting for when the darkness comes. Good night, traveler. Sleep well.